Welcome everybody to today's webinar on editing Adobe InDesign documents online. This is Jill Talvansari and I'm with Silicon Publishing, and we're going to go ahead. We've got a lot of people that are very interested in how they can use InDesign online, so we're going to give it just about 2 minutes past the top of the hour to let everybody join us, and we will get started. Welcome to those of you just joining us. We're just waiting to hit critical mass. We expect to get started at about 2 minutes after the top of the hour. Special thanks to those of you just now joining us. We've got a few more people coming in. All right. Well, I think we're ready to get started here. So thank you for joining Silicon Publishing's webinar today on editing Adobe InDesign documents online. We're very excited to show you some real-world use cases, and we will have lots of time for Q&A. Just a little bit of housekeeping here. As you have questions, please go ahead and put them directly into the Q&A box, and we'll make sure we get to them in real time so that there's context for everybody. If you've got longer conversation, we can also bring you off mute and have a talk at the end of the call. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panelists here today. With me, I've got Max Dunn, Brett Kisner, Ole Kvern, and myself. And I want to extend a special thank you to Jeff Seal. He helped put together a lot of the information that you see in today's presentation. So thanks to Jeff for that. Max, would you like to go ahead and introduce yourself and what we're going to go into today?
Sure. I'm the co-founder of Silicon Publishing, and we've been at this 19 years and happy to show what we've accomplished.
Excellent. And Brett?
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. I'll be adding some commentary as we go through the presentation.
Okay, and I think you're also going to be keeping us honest on the Q&A, right?
Absolutely.
Excellent. Ole?
I was the InDesign scripting guy early on. I helped document, evangelize, and with some of the development of InDesign scripting. Had a fair amount to do with the creation of InDesign Server, which all of our stuff is based on, and IDML, which you guys may know. And I'm the co-author with David Blattner and Bob Bringhurst of Real World InDesign. That's it for me.
So you know a little bit about InDesign. Honestly, here we've got a world-class panel for you of InDesign experts, and we all feel your pain in terms of getting marketing at scale and personalization and all of those pressures that we see today. So to that point, I'd like to go ahead and ask our audience a few polling questions. The first one is, how many of you have had a salesperson create their own marketing materials? And the second one is, how many of you regularly use InDesign? And the third one is, how many of you have had content management or DAM systems that you use regularly?
And this is when I'm sad I can't vote on this.
I know, I decided not to let you. I already know your answers anyway. Yes, yes, and yes. So it looks like a lot of people have had the sales folks try to create their own marketing materials. 3/4 of you have had a salesperson create their own branding. My personal experience with that has been often it goes better than I had hoped it would, and when it goes poorly, it's really, really ugly. And then regular InDesign users is 88%, and then ones that use content management and DAM, it's split about half and half. So thanks for that. We've got some good stories for you about salespeople and how they can create their own marketing materials successfully now.
Okay, so this is the agenda. This is what we're going to discuss today. We're going to talk about the challenges. In other words, why would you want to edit online? Then look at the solution, and then look at the various different ways you can edit InDesign files from a browser. Before diving into the implementation, where we'll have examples of a variety of ways to deploy this functionality and the different systems it can interoperate with. Finally, we'll open it up for Q&A and provide an opportunity for you to try this yourself. So the solution we're showing is going to, in a typical use case, this is not the same for everybody, but in general, designers create the InDesign templates and non-designers edit those online in a controlled fashion, which can be a variety of different approaches to UI and content management. And then the client receives professional on-brand marketing collateral efficiently and quickly at scale. So the challenge is, what happens when salespeople create their own collateral? And I have not personally witnessed a ton of success at this. I've seen a lot of disasters when salespeople create their own collateral. Certainly when I try to create stuff, I know I'm not a designer. So you get wonderful scenarios like this, where they use fonts that aren't necessarily correct. They'll sort of deviate from the brand. They tend to, not be, they're great at sales, but they're not designers. So the solution is to bring in a designer and this wonderful tool called Adobe InDesign, which is pretty much ubiquitous for making documents these days that are going to print. In the early stages in small scale operations, a single designer can work wonders for a company at a certain scale. And that's fine. You just use InDesign. There's nothing wrong with InDesign. It's fantastic. But what happens is when you grow, that's one factor in seeing challenges. When you grow, you have to produce more and more content. And you can get these edge cases. And these edge cases is where you see things crop up, where the salespeople will overrun the designer and they can't handle the load they have to produce. And then you have deviations from brand. You have things that are substandard, not conformant, and you have people doing things they're not meant to do. It gets even worse as the team continues to grow. And what about multiple offices? That's even worse again, because the communication gets easily diverted and inefficient. So that's why we created Silicon Designer. That's one of the main use cases for Silicon Designer. Silicon Designer allows for controlled online collaboration, where you can edit the InDesign documents online, which is very important. And we'll show you this is subtle. It can be done differently, very differently, depending on what your goals are. The designer has the role then of setting up the templates. They don't necessarily have to produce every last variant of that template, but they set them up. And they set them up in different ways, in different degrees, depending on what your needs are. So we have ways to set up templates with very minimal work in pure InDesign techniques, like layer naming and that sort of thing. And then we have plugins that can facilitate really robust workflows with really fine-grained control. And in the case of Silicon Designer, our user interface is completely adaptable. It's very extensible and built to be made your own. So the way you see Designer is going to be different depending on your documents, your needs. So the first thing I'm going to show is the capacity to not set up a template, to upload a template into the system that is arbitrary. This is an InDesign document, and it's just been created with standard InDesign. There's no plugin involved. There's nothing special about the document. I just put some text frames on an InDesign document and made a poster. And what I would do in InDesign is choose File, Package, and package this up, and it will zip up the document, the assets, and the fonts, as you do every day with InDesign. What I can do with Designer is upload this, and so I'm going to upload this template. I'm going to select the zipped up package that was exported directly from InDesign, and I'm going to define a name for this in the system. I'm going to call it Poster 1, and this will upload into our Designer application and automatically create an editing experience directly from that document. I did no setup. I did nothing special. I just took an InDesign document, and our system kind of guessed. It said, well, what do I want to call these text frames? It didn't guess really well. It took the name of the frame, but they're here. So every text frame is present. Every graphic is present, and now I can edit it. And this UI is pretty form-based and simple, but it's pretty functional to let someone go on and make a change to a document and see it reflected on the web. So I've gone from an online sale to an offline sale. Let me see if I can change that image. Change the image and see what happens. So the question is how that looks like a different aspect ratio. I think the fitting property of the frame is what makes it stretch properly to look okay there. And so that's basically zero setup, instant editing. And that's sort of the baseline of Silicon Designer in its most crude and basic form. There are other things you might want to do, and some of them can be done really simply. In this case, I've got a template for real estate, which is kind of the use case we're demonstrating first. And you might not want someone to edit every field. So I've locked some of the content. And you might want more friendly field names. So I've named some of the fields. And then this would show up, and I won't upload it in front of you, but I did earlier. This will show up with the right field names, and it will show the layers are actually defining the two tabs of information. And then the names on the fields are controlling the CTA, photo, property, headline, etc. And I can, again, edit the text online and change it without impacting the design. This is a very clean separation of content from presentation, where you might not want to let the user change much. And so this is good at keeping those salespeople devoted to sales and content rather than changing the design intent of the document. So I've made that edit, and it's reflected in the document online.
Okay.
So
Max, one of the questions that did come up is there a specific version of InDesign that's required?
We tend to support the latest 2 versions, just like Adobe. We're not really relishing supporting old Adobe versions nowadays because they don't relish that either. So they're doing less and less support for older versions. So we tend to be the latest one and the one before it. It does take a little bit of time for us to adapt to a brand new version as well. So maybe a couple months after a major release comes out, we'll have it updated. We tend to follow the beta and the dot release really carefully, but it's pretty much current recent versions.
Okay.
Yeah, and then one other question was, can you change the layout of the forms so that you don't have to have them tabbed, but you can have them all in a list or something like that?
Yes, we'll show you a wide range of UI. There is some default behavior that is easy and comes naturally. And as you'll see later on, there are infinite possibilities for UI. The UI can be anything you make it, and we'll show you 20 different UIs.
Great.
Is that it?
That's it for now.
So what happened? We uploaded the template, and there was a user interface for editing it created, and the user made edits, and we then have a new document. That looks really simple, and it should be simple to the user. You don't have to know all about it. But what we're doing really is we're interrogating that document. We're writing code, and we've been writing this code for decades, that takes that document apart, and it turns it into a web experience, and it is respecting not just the geometries of the page and the objects, but it's respecting the metadata that you put in. In this case, in the simple case, it's choosing to not make a form field if something is locked. It's choosing to make the property description come from the metadata in the document. That was the tab on the layer, and then the names or field names are available. Graphic frames, returning to image selectors. This is the very basics of analyzing an InDesign template and turning it into an editing experience. We can go a lot further than you do. So there is a whole spectrum of ways you might use Designer, and we can provide. Those aren't the best pictures for this. We can provide ways that you would edit in a more sexy way. This, instead of a tab, you might be wanting to edit directly on the canvas of the document.
Hey, Max, what's the performance like when it's multiple pages, like a catalog or that type of document?
That's a great question. Now, it really depends on so many factors, but we have scaled it recently to ridiculous speeds. Or if you really need to go fast, we can go really, really fast. So InDesign Server is a far more powerful engine than desktop, and you're able to scale it by running in parallel. So it depends on a number of factors. You know, one critical factor is hardware, so it will go as fast as you make it go and need it to go. But we've pretty much attained arbitrary throughput with InDesign Server. So dragging an image, it might be another way to change the image rather than choosing from a list. But again, we're agnostic as to the user experience. We let you choose your own way to edit things. This is not what you would typically let a salesperson do, but I could maybe take this and edit this one vector graphic and make a very big spoon. We can do all sorts of things with UI to edit InDesign documents, and that includes on-canvas editing for many, many things, as you'll see.
Yeah. And so, Max, one of the other questions that's come in is, can templates be made to resize to fit the content within them, like for an ad space?
Absolutely. Yeah, there is a fine art to resizing and fitting things, and we've done what you can do with that. There are certainly few miracles in that world. We have ways to do what can be done, but there are certain limits. We don't have absolute magic for resizing and fitting everything, but we sure fit a lot of things. Given limits are your friends. Given a specific use case, we can usually handle it. Some things are automatic when they're easy. So it's a subtle question and can be,
Yep. And then one more question before you go on. Where can images that you're using be sourced from? Can they come from a DAM as well as an individual user's machine that they can upload?
Absolutely, yes. We have a flexible API that is abstracting out the image, so we support connecting to various social media sites for stock image galleries, galleries of what we call user-generated content, where you've uploaded your images. You can upload an image directly. There's many ways. We're used to deploying this in every context you can imagine. So yes, images can and do reside everywhere.
All right, that's it for now.
Okay, so what we do in the more advanced forms of Designer, we apply tools. We have a tool set inside of InDesign that can let you make things easier to set up or more powerful or offer very fine-grained control. So I've got these markup styles here. I've got 3 different markup styles. And these are going to say everything about how an object is going to be editable in the user interface. And it's very powerful, but very simple too, because we can just apply an editable image, and the designer generally doesn't have to know a lot about what an editable image means. But under the hood, there are serious properties here that are saying this is visible, selectable, deletable, movable. All of these things can be defined in the context of one style. So it's kind of like an InDesign paragraph style, where you can choose how that object will behave. Generally, you just define what your styles are going to be up front and don't change them on the fly, because there are some fairly logical things that happen. So let's look at that spoon. This is a movable vector graphic, right? One thing you noted when I resized it is it was scaling proportionally. That's something you would want with vector graphics, you would think. I would think you'd always want to scale proportionally, but no, some people making yearbooks want to distort clip art and make it non-proportional. So you have your right to do that if you really wish. But in the real world, most people come down to a set of behaviors that are fairly common, and then they create markup styles that can then let them easily set up a template for ingestion into the web.
Anne-Marie asked a question earlier about can users change the fonts? So this is the answer. This is how you can allow freedom of changing fonts, or you can lock down your your corporate ID by not letting users change fonts. This is all stuff that we can add to document metadata that changes the editing experience online. So this is what Max is showing here. This is how to control what can be done so that your salesperson isn't replacing your logo with a picture of their cat.
Yes, limits are your friends, right? We showed some very constrained interfaces. These are getting very freeform, but someone here decided, I don't want copy fit on my text frame here. It must be this font or die. So that was their choice. Somewhere in this markup style, we'll have copy fit, I think. Copy fitting none. I could choose fit content to frame or truncate. There's different options and different copy fit algorithms we could apply there. But yes, this is also going to say, can I change the font? Can I change the color? Can I move it? It's a very rigorous control over the document editing experience that's defined by how you set it up.
And then Max, just before you go on, another question came in about being able to populate templates with data coming from a PIM or a database. Don't know if you want to cover that while you're looking at the template markup as well.
Sure. Variables. For instance, I guess this one would be more relevant to the variables. You can pull in variables and assign them from the same panel that we use for marking up the template, and everything can be data-driven. And I know in the real estate world, this agent photo would be driven from a variable. Typically, it would be agent photo ID, and that would then pull when the agent loaded the app. In this case, they would see their face right away because it would know who they are, and the containing web app would pass that in. So absolutely,
yeah,
variables are very cool.
Yeah, and in other workflows, the database could actually be exposed through the UI as well. So if there are different records and user needs to be able to choose which one they want to apply to the document, they could have that as well.
Okay, so let's sort of look back higher level of this use case and review a little bit about just the context that this is working within. Like we said, the designer is going to create professional quality content. In the first place, these templates that can be used. And typically, like I said, limits are your friend. To do this efficiently, that designer will really become king or queen of the web app because they control, when they're setting up that template, what the user is going to get. They have real control. Locking things down is really important. You don't want to have, the legalese controlled by a salesperson. That can be in the hands of the lawyers or unavailable in some workflow where you don't have the danger of that. The editable regions can be enabled to be editable in the first place, and then the user interface can be highly defined. So you could have a date picker for a date field or a number validator for a phone field. There are many things you can do to make that editing experience really tuned to what someone's going to need to do. It's really very different than an InDesign experience. You want these people on the web to quickly and efficiently make a document. So how things are editable matters. Similarly, the image replacement locations don't necessarily have to just say this is replaceable or not. It can be much more fine-grained and say this is a property photo, so it would come from this database. This is an agent photo, maybe it's coming as a variable. And the style catalog also can be controlled by the designer. So this gives the designer a far more majestic role than just making 20 variants of the same thing. They can really define the rules of the game and then let the salespeople or marketing people make the variants themselves. The sales team then can operate in a browser. They can add image, they can add text, they can make changes to this document without having to learn InDesign, which, I love InDesign. I've worked with InDesign 19 years professionally. I cannot master that app to save my life. I don't know I really respect anyone who knows InDesign that well. So I really feel for the salespeople here. And then they export it to the client as a high quality PDF. The edits they make are just what they need to edit. That they might have one variable they care about, and going online and quickly making that one change is far better than sending an email to a designer to go open up the InDesign file, go make sure it's that field of the square footage and change that, right? So that's really the benefit for them. And the other cool thing is it really scales. It doesn't have the bottlenecks of email communication, and it lets non-designers much more quickly make changes. And the branded collateral is really branded properly now because there isn't the risk. There is actually an impossibility for someone to go run amok completely if you lock things down properly. So designers create templates in InDesign.
Yeah. Sorry, Max.
So Max, there were a couple questions on images, and I think everyone's suffered from from this before. One question was whether you can verify image resolution, and then the other is if you can verify that the image is in the right color space?
Yes, we have extensive validation every step of the way. So we start verifying things on template setup and ingestion. So we can analyze when the template is loaded to see that the images are a minimum DPI, which you can specify, or that they have conform to a color space or a job option preference. We're using InDesign Server, so we have all of its control over those things, over pre-flighting. And because we're in the web, as you scale an image, it will warn you. If you might scale an image to ruin the DPI, right? It will warn you if you do. Sometimes many of our clients won't even let you make a document unless you're at the proper DPI and you've passed the validation. So we validate on setup, we validate on load, we validate in the UI, and we validate on render at the back end. So yes.
And it's worth even mentioning that we can do conversion as well for things that come in, for instance, as RGB, but we want to see them white.
Yep. Yeah, we automate InDesign, and the engine is very beautifully extensible thanks to Oli and others who built it. So non-designers end up, like the sales team, editing online with Designer, and the clients get really good output that is in typically PDF is for print, but we can output HTML5, we can output PNG, we can export various formats, and we see InDesign getting increasing use in non-print capacity. I know a company that has 4,000 seats of InDesign to do infographics right now. They never print, but they use InDesign intensely.
So Max, in terms of output, a couple questions that have come in on that is the output actually delivered to the user who's creating the document? Can it be saved to a database? Can you talk a little bit about the options there?
Yes, maybe you could talk to those, I think.
Sure, absolutely. So, this all depends on the workflow. So in some workflows where you're dealing with a sales rep who's creating a customized brochure, they may want the ability to create a customized version or personalized version of the brochure, be able to then hit a button and attach it to an email or attach it to a record in Salesforce. But if you're dealing with, a web-to-print type workflow, creating a greeting card that you're then going to order through the printer, that would be a good example where you're going to actually take that person from the editing experience over to an order form, and that document's going to be saved back to the server. Maybe you give them a watermarked version that allows them to essentially preview what they've built. All of this ends up depending on the workflow and the use case that you want to implement.
Great. So I'm going to show a couple more use cases, and then we can open up for Q&A. But it's at a high level, it's relevant to many industries. We've always, every month or 2 months, we're surprised by where this thing ends up. But people value online design all over the world. These are some of the use cases and document types that we've encountered, and it's a tiny subset of what we've done. So we built yearbook apps, photo book apps, 3D modeling is bigger and bigger these days. Real estate is a classic example of the marketing use cases. There's no end to it. So it's really a very broad horizontal solution. We're not really focused on one vertical per se. And it's built in a way that's modular. The UI, the user interface, it's very dangerous to show designer. I show designer, and they say, no, but I'd like the controls on the left. Well, it's not really hard-coded at all. It's decoupled. We've spent a long time with real experts making the behavior of the app entirely independent of its front end or appearance. So it can run on a mobile device really well. It can have a UI that's tailored to your unique needs. It can fit into your existing application. It is really built for making that UI what you want. And we had one tragic incident where someone took our default skin and didn't change it. They didn't know you could change it. So they came with this ugly skin out into the world, and we just helped them fix that. But you don't really want to use our default skin. Most of you people are more creative, and we're absolutely flexible. We can implement any skin. It's all built with web standards, so you can also change the interface yourself. We implement it inside of something. That's what I'm about to show, is inside of a shopping cart. It's important to understand that we're not focused on the tangents off of this. We're really focused on the editing experience. We can build shopping carts, we can build workflow systems, we can build dams, but those are never going to be our core products. Those are things where you're at a large scale, you're going to do that yourself or find the optimal shopping cart, the optimal dam, the optimal workflow. The key to this age is modularity. Everything is modular and interoperable, and we build Silicon Designer to fit inside of a dam, to talk to an asset library or social media gallery, to let the containing web page talk to it and inform it. It might pass in variables from your web app. The backend is all built with RESTful services, so you can request documents, you can request previews, you can apply imaging pipelines via RESTful services with your application calling Silicon Designer externally. So I'm going to show one of those contexts that it can reside in. This is printing.com or FlyerZone, and they have over 100,000 templates, many types. They have lots and lots of content that you can customize, and this is a pretty middle-of-the-road marketing set of document content, and you can take one of these and have your own editing experience. They have built this themselves. This was their UI. They're using our customization layer, and they simply extended this application the way they wanted for their document types. We have some cool features. The app authors that they use, one is CopyFit. So this text frame had been marked up, or it was somehow set up to tell the app, this is CopyFit in here. You know, the logo, this is dangerous, I'm not sure, will it warn me? I don't know. If I scaled it big enough, it would warn me when it may now be a vector file. No? There it is, the warning. It warned me that the logo is too big. That was the DPI warning for when you scale a graphic, a raster image that won't work. So that's editable, you know, inside of a shopping cart. That shopping cart, this, important to know, we didn't build this. This is what they have as their shopping cart. We can build containers. We have a sort of default approach to containing Designer, but again, we're not focused on that. We're focused on making our app work inside of shopping carts like this. The last use case I'm going to show is a sort of trend. We started hearing the word templating about 3 years ago. We didn't know what that meant. If you look it up, you can't find the use case I'm talking about. But we partner with a lot of digital asset management companies for some reason, and we work with digital asset management in other contexts than Designer. So we have a lot of friends in this space and really cool companies we work with. You know, a lot of clients, you know, rather than have us manage their assets, they're going to turn to some professionals who really know what they're doing, like the Adobe Experience Manager. They started coming to us and saying, do you do templating? I was like, what's that? Templating is this. Templating is an editable InDesign document, and that's something that these dams are doing more and more and more, and it just makes sense. So you've got your InDesign file inside of an asset management system like Adobe Experience Manager, and this is AAM Assets. This is Adobe Experience Manager, and it's a great place to store your content. And so they go for miles, not just with storing your content, but they have a beautiful web editor, and they have an incredibly robust workflow system. And many of the asset management systems we work with provide really cool features that we don't really want to be building. They build them really well. In this case, what we did is we built a little integration with AAM so they can have a special class of InDesign document. It's called an editable InDesign template. And when I click this button, it's going to create a new document from template. And this is just taking that asset, which did have some setup, and it's loading it into the environment and letting me really go to town with the editing. And when I'm done editing, it's going to save it right back into Adobe Experience Manager. But from this, you know, I can, the user is really empowered to make whatever changes they want.
Yeah, and it's important to remember that, of course, all of this is controlled. As you saw, as Max was setting up the template before, you can determine how the user can edit it. Can they add a drop shadow? Can they change the font? In this case, they happen to have let that logo change, so we could change it into a picture of my cat.
That would be a great logo.
What we're seeing here is, oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Basically, we've put as much of InDesign as we can into an app that runs in a web browser. And in some demos, people will see this and they'll think that we're still in InDesign. But we're actually in a web browser, and we will get as close to InDesign's typesetting as we can, given the limitations of HTML5. So things like line endings won't change when you go from your web editor to InDesign and out to PDF, for example, and that's really a big deal. We worked really hard on getting the type as close as we could, and certainly keeping line breaks consistent.
Yeah, it's been really fun to build this over the years, and here's the real solution to DPI. This is a vector image, so it will just scale. And we also go really far. We're demoing this for you in the real world. Unfortunately, things are probably a lot more locked down. But like Oli says, we can take InDesign-ish features to their limits if you really want. And this here is interrogating that document, breaking it into all of its layers, and then enabling the user to change the stacking order of things. And I just secured the logo by putting the white triangle on top of it. I can put the logo back by dragging it up. And we can do way more than you might ever dream of doing. It is important to point out that we're not aiming at InDesign on the web. This is not like, oh, I want to replace InDesign on the web. We see zero reason to do that. We think InDesign is the best application on earth for the core content creation. The workflow that makes the most sense really is probably the more boring stuff we showed earlier. So freedom is a beautiful thing, but it's not always the best thing.
Yeah, and so actually a really good question just came up about that last document you were in. Can you constrain where an element is placed, i.e. can't move it outside the frame that it's within? So that's a really good one, because you saw those rules. Max was able to actually go in and resize an image inside of its frame. And you could actually lock it so that the frame can't be moved, but the content inside of it could be moved, could be resized. So all sorts of layers to those rules as well.
Yes, and in the real world, that's the crux of it, is to make the editable experience bulletproof and hard to screw up. So often, like I said, the real world is very constrained, and I've seen data on which apps are most successful, and kind of sad for us, those first ones we showed are kind of the optimal use case in many cases. Just enter the text, update the text. Not thrilling for us, but hey, it's very practical for someone that wants to make collateral really quickly and just change a price, then just change the price. We can handle the spectrum from the very constrained to the very freeform. And there's a nice balance. And again, it depends really on the use cases. If you look at the different use cases, there's a different UI that makes sense in different use cases. So we see freeform really big in school yearbooks, right? School yearbooks, those kids want to go to town and put all sorts of stuff all over that page, and they do. They put drop shadows on things that you might not think would get a drop shadow, but hey, it's fun, it's creative, and that's what they want to do. More practical, something like the pharma world, quite locked down. Regulatory approval, every element may well be a variable that has a workflow associated and a validation process associated with it. And the UI gets very boring, but that's not boring to them when they have the correct information on their document. So yeah, I think those are great questions so far.
Yeah, so we've got some others. Only one of the questions had to do with validation and how exactly, we talked about things like making sure the images are the right resolution, things like that. How is that all set up? Is that something that the designer can build into the document? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah, well, I mean, there are a lot of InDesign features that that let you essentially enforce rules, like the way that text frames grow or don't grow. But for our more picky, I guess, validation rules, it's extensible. It's something the customer can set up. It's something that we can set up in consultation with the customer. It's completely open-ended. It's not okay, here are the rules, because the rules are going to differ for different document types, different markets, and so on.
Fantastic. Another question that we got is in terms of DAM integration. What happens if the asset in the DAM is updated?
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah, will that update the document?
It can if you want. Absolutely, yes. That's the nature of our other product that brought us into the DAM space so far. We in 2010 we built a connector between InDesign and remote asset sources, and that was kind of the theme. It would let you InDesign under the hood will pull and test is that asset current, and it will follow rules as to what do you do when it's not current, when the asset is stale in the document and updated in the DAM. And our connector for desktop InDesign can enforce the rules you want for how you deal with changing assets. Same with the web, and Silicon Designer is also able to follow the policy that you want to follow. So sometimes you have to leave that asset and have a process to review before it can be updated. Sometimes you just want to get the latest and greatest one automatically, and so it's really up to you how you configure that, but absolutely that can happen.
Another question that came in had to do with review and approval. Can this fit into, let's say we create a document, can this then feed an approval workflow?
Absolutely. The Adobe Experience Manager application that I showed earlier is based on a real-world implementation where they care a lot. This is a charity that has to produce lots of content for events, and they let the event coordinator create the content, but they have to be very careful with their assets and what's approved and what's not approved. And so they have a workflow that gets kicked off. The event creator will create something, and then it goes right into a workflow queue, and someone will get it the next morning, and they'll check, are these assets legally valid? Or is someone trying to infringe on a copyright, etc. So workflow is absolutely part and parcel of most large-scale implementations.
Yeah, and alongside that, another question that came in and said, we gave an example of pharma and having content that's locked down that can't be changed because it's regulated. The user's asking, is there a way to pull text in that's also pre-approved? And certainly yes, that fits in very, very pragmatically in the variable type workflow and being able to connect that to a database or repository of that info. Just looking through some of the other questions here. How is this, Max, how can this be deployed for a customer?
So great question. Yeah, we are now offering increasing, let's go back to our history. We originally built custom solutions, then we built a software product in 2009 called Designer, and now we are starting to host it more and more and build more solutions that are somewhat generic that you can just log into. So we're sort of descending from a very custom solution focus down to more of a SaaS focus, but we're not going to lose sight of the customization, and we want our technology always to be very extensible and to be able to go the last mile for someone. So the answer really is we can do it different ways. It can deploy in your environment, which we've deployed in many different environments, AWS, bare metal, any kind of data center or cloud system, or we can deploy it in our cloud. And in our cloud, it can be absolutely custom to you, or it can be a more generic shared application that's a common interface with others.
Absolutely. And then there are a few questions that have to do with supporting various features, and they tend to be very very much based on the type of output. So examples are, you know, videos that go into an interactive PDF or form elements, things like that. And I think ultimately the benefit here is that we are leveraging InDesign and InDesign Server in the background. So we can support all of the capabilities in various ways that InDesign supports itself. And so ultimately we can do all of those same things through the browser.
And more, I mean, we're also deploying a web app, so we have a little more flexibility than InDesign has in some cases. Like if you're going to integrate video, the video features of InDesign are not currently exactly everything you might want. So we can augment InDesign features when needed and make things play better with HTML5 or responsive layout or video or dimensional objects.
Yeah, and that's a good point. Ultimately, everything that we're doing, you know, in the browser is rendered, you know, in HTML, and so the ability to leverage that content for HTML formats is possible as well. I'm just scanning here. I think we've covered everything, Max.
Okay.
All right. We're getting some comments on a great webinar, and I just wanted to thank everybody for coming. And Max, this was an amazing presentation. Thank you so much.
Oh, I guess we didn't cover quite everything.
No, we want to try it.
That was the question and answers, but here is where you try it. You sign up here, and we'll get right back to you and let you try this for yourself.
Yep, you can upload your own assets and take it for a spin. We will also be sending out the recording and this offer to everybody that registered for the webinar. And anyone you want to share this with, they can also register for the webinar and see it in real time the minute we get off of here, actually. All right, thanks everybody for coming.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.